Welcome or welcome back to the 8th concession. My name is Natalie. Well, I was thinking of something today as I was heading over to do the chickens. Today they're getting apples and grapes. And that is about our life here on the farm going forward. Because the sad truth about everything here on the homestead is, no matter when you start your homesteading journey, whether you're in your 20s, your 30s, or beyond, you're not getting any younger. And the reason I had that thought is because as I was walking over to the coops today, I realized that they're in need of a cleaning. And once again, I was really grateful for how Craig designed our coops to make them easy for cleaning. Hey ladies. Hey girls. And not just for cleaning, but also for collecting the eggs. And none of this was by accident. The fact is, Craig and I have been thinking about how we're setting things up on our homestead since the very beginning to allow us to age in place. Aging in place simply means setting up systems and structures so that you can stay in your home or on your farm or on your homestead for as long as possible as you get a bit older and you have some new challenges, moving around, or maybe you're injured or disabled. Craig and I bought this property, we were already in our 50s, so this was really on our mind. We wanted to enjoy this property as long as possible. So we have made deliberate choices in how we've built things and how we've set them up. And I thought I'd share some of them with you. We're not completely done, but we have started to, maybe we'll give you some inspiration so that as you are building structures, no matter what your age, no matter how far along your homestead is on your homesteading journey, you can make some decisions that you might be grateful for as time goes on. Let's start in the garden. Those of you who've been following me for some time know that I've been working quite diligently to get all my garden beds in. And you can see that I'm using raised beds. And that is on purpose. And I'm also using concrete, or sometimes called cinder blocks, to build them. Now, raised beds are great for gardening. That has nothing to do with aging in place. They are just great at getting your plants up out of the ground, especially if you don't have good soil underneath, like we don't here. We have very heavy clay. They're good because you can regulate what type of soil you put in, and they tend to warm up earlier in the spring. They tend to stay warmer longer in the fall. There are lots of good reasons to use raised beds. And you can make raised beds out of a lot of different materials. Quite often they're made of wood. Sometimes I've seen corrugated metal in between posts. People are weaving sticks like wattle or willow to make raised beds, and all of those work perfectly fine. But the problem with all of those is over time, those materials are going to break down. The wood will rot, the metal will rust, and you are going to have to rebuild those beds in 5 or 10 or 15 years. Part of our plan here on the 8th concession is to build things so that they last. They last longer than we will. And that's what these concrete blocks are going to do. We are not going to have to rebuild these beds in 10 or 15 years when the structure falls apart. The one thing I really like about the concrete blocks is that they're wide, and you can see I have pavers on top of these. The new beds don't have pavers yet, but as I've mentioned before, it's because I can't buy the correct size anymore, and I'm going to have to make them next year. But soon they will all be covered in these pavers. Because the second best thing about these concrete block beds, besides lasting or outlasting me, is you can sit on them. They are super comfortable because they are wide, and you can sit on them and lean over and weed or plant or harvest or just tend your garden. And that really appeals to me as I get older. The other great thing about these is right now we've made them 2 blocks high. The first block is kind of sitting down in the ground. But if we wanted them higher, say someone had an accident or our mobility really goes down, we can easily stack another layer or 2 on top and make them almost waist height if we wanted to. So it's nice to have that flexibility. The second thing we did in our garden is we made really nice wide aisles between the beds. Everything is 4 feet wide, and that can accommodate not only wheelbarrows and wagons right now, but heaven forbid if someone's in a walker or a wheelchair, there's still enough room for them to get around. Now, right now, the ground is not as even as it would need to be, and that's because I'm still working on the garden down here. But the idea is to have nice, even, flat ground in between the beds, so you minimize tripping hazards. And also, again, if unfortunately someone is in some sort of wheelchair or using a walker, they will have an easier time getting around. Notice I don't say me, just someone. The other thing I've tried to utilize in my garden is vertical growing space. You can see my trellis here, which I've made using a cattle panel and some T-posts. And that's good because as much as you can, if you can get your growing to happen up, then you have less bending over to do. So I grow gourds on these, I grow peas, I grow cucumbers, certain tomatoes that are indeterminate and grow like the Matt's Wild Cherry tomatoes. Anything like that where I can get the plant going up and over helps. You can see over here by the berry bushes, we've used that same sort of idea. We have these posts in the ground and wires running across to keep the plants up and easy to take care of, to prune, and to harvest. We've made similar decisions in our flower beds as well. You can see the same idea here. When we first bought this place, this was edged with railway ties, and they had broken down, they were rotting, and so we replaced them with stone because, again, we won't have to rebuild the wall in 10 or 15 years. The stone will last. The other thing I like to do to make my gardening easier is to use ground cover so that I can keep the amount of weeding I'm going to have to do in the future down to a minimum. You can see I have some creeping thyme here, snow in summer. There's a creeping sedum at the back here, right here, called dragon's blood. And this one here is rock cress. So in between the plants, I like to cover the ground as much as possible. That keeps down the weeding. The other thing is I have really used a lot of perennials in this bed. I'm sorry, my peonies look a little bedraggled, but it is October. I haven't trimmed them back. But I have peonies, I have iris, I have hostas, I have lavender. I do use some annuals. You can see I have some petunias here, because there's nothing wrong with that. But in the future, if I don't have the time or the energy or the mobility to plant an entire bed full of annuals, my bed will still look lovely because they are low maintenance perennial plants. I'm also interested in using perennials in my fruit and vegetable beds. You can see my asparagus and strawberries in. Plant them once, harvest for many, many years. I like that. The same idea is behind our orchard. All the trees that I purchased, I made sure they were either dwarf or semi-dwarf. And that's so that the trees will stay naturally small. A bit of pruning keeps them at the height I want, and it makes it easy to take care of them even when they're full grown and bearing fruit. And harvesting is easy too. I don't need to be climbing up on a ladder trying to get my peaches or cherries. We were thinking about the same things even when we purchased the house. It's a side split where we have very few stairs. We wanted a complete bungalow, but we didn't manage to find it on the land we wanted at a price we could afford. So we have a few steps to contend with here, but not too many. But one of the other big considerations was going forward, not only mobility and accessibility, but finances. Once we're retired in some distant future, we're going to have to think about how much money we have coming in and how we're going to spend that. And one of the big concerns we had on this property when we moved in is it had an oil furnace. Now, when we lived in town, we had a natural gas furnace, and we spent back then, maybe $900 a year to heat it, about $90 a month on a payment plan. And that was normal to me living in town. Then we moved out here, and this oil furnace was a beast. It would take, if we were very careful with our heat, we would need about 3 tankfuls of oil per year to heat the house. And the furnace itself, although it wasn't that old, we saw the records, it was about 8 or 10 years old, which with a house being 50 years old, it could have been a lot older, but it wasn't. But it was glitchy. Oh, we had so much trouble. It would start locking us out and the heat wouldn't come on, and we're trying to call repairmen out, and it was this strange type, and it was older, and it was horrible. It was horrible not to depend on heat. And then the cost. So we went from paying roughly $900 a year for natural gas heat in a bigger house, mind you, to, 3 or 4 tanks. And when we first moved in here, it was about $800 to fill a tank with heating oil. So $3,200 a year from $900. That wasn't even the worst of it. When the pandemic hit and supply chains were disrupted, the price of a tank of heating oil went up to $1,200. The last tank we bought was $1,200, and I know it went up higher than that. I think it was $1,500. So now we're talking $4,500 a year to heat this house, and it wasn't even good heat. And on top of that, we had a very, very old air conditioner, and it was on its last legs. It had to be 25 years old. So we were going to have to replace that as well. And on top of that, oil tanks don't even last forever. Well, the tank itself might last forever, but the regulations around oil tanks do not last forever. You have to get a new tank, I believe it's every 10 years. And you also have to have them inspected every 5 years or something like that. The tank that was in the basement was coming up on 9 years. So we were going to have to get a brand new tank as well. All these things made us reflect on how we wanted to heat this house going forward, because, that was getting into a lot of money, and it didn't look like it was going to get any better. So we turned to new technology, and that is this baby. This is our geothermal furnace. And we've had it now, I think, 4 years, and we absolutely love it. It's a little noisy down here right now because it's running, but it uses the Earth's heat to warm our house, and better yet, to also cool our house, because all we have to do is reverse the system, and it's also our air conditioner. Now, in order for this to work, we had to have a huge trench dug across our property, and that was a huge undertaking. But it worked out perfectly. It was a rather dry year. They were able to get down deep enough, and they've run, I think it was 300 meters of piping, maybe it's 600 meters. I've got the numbers wrong, I'm sure, into the ground all across the back of our property. And then they filled it back in, and we can still use that land above it. There's no danger. I can put gardens up there. We can do whatever we need. So that has drastically changed everything. Now the only cost with running this is a bit of electricity to run the fan and the pump. And we have only noticed, I would say, $25 to $50 a month difference on our hydro bill. Now, I'm not even sure that that's from our heat pump, our geothermal furnace, because the price of electricity has gone up in the meantime too. So it is negligible. It is definitely doable. And going forward, knowing that we are not tied to the cost of fossil fuels in order to heat our home really makes us feel good. And we have the opportunity, if in the future somehow we could get solar here and generate our own electricity, then we don't even have those costs to worry about. But that's a future project. So we're far from done, but every decision we make, we keep in mind, how is this going to affect us when we age? And, when we do the patio, we will eventually be thinking about the steps. How wide are they? What sort of railing will there be? Anything to make it easier on us, anything to make the materials long lasting, or anything to keep in mind what things are going to cost us when we're retired and we don't have as much money coming in. So those are the things that we're doing to think about being able to stay here as long as possible. Do you have any other tips or ideas on this? I'd love to hear them down in the comments, because we will consider everything. We're so happy out here. We want to stay as long as possible. Bye for now.